And so feel free to, I hope everybody's comfortable with that anyway, but I'll get to why we're recording here in just a moment. But this started with all these questions and commentary, and it led to Dr. Ananda and his scintillating Saturdays. And we posed the question to him. It's like, what do we do about this? You're from that philosophy, and what do you think of us and how we teach and what we teach and how we handle cultural appropriation? And so that discussion happened, and he was more than happy to talk with us about that and did his scintillating Saturday. So each of you that have registered for this meeting, I did send an email back to you last night that included the link to that discussion and a beautiful article that Dr. Ananda wrote regarding that discussion. And if you haven't had a chance to view either or read either, please do so when you can. Might help us carry on this topic and carry on this discussion a little deeper. But with that said, next thing I knew, we've got an ebook that Dr. Ananda and Padma and Malini put together so beautifully and sent it out, again, sharing graciously from his heart. There is a link, however, to pay for the book, the download, the ebook, and I think it's about $10 US, €9.99 euro, something to that effect, to support the ashram. So without that support, we wouldn't be sitting here having this discussion today. So what I want to start with a little bit is, you guys are welcome to chime in. I want us, because we have an hour each week, or every other week to talk, I'm here for the duration. If it takes us 2 weeks or 2 months to get through this and move on to the next topic, I am thrilled to do so. But what I'd like to talk about is the first little bit about the terminology and what some of this means. Because when we asked the question of Dr. Ananda, what is cultural appropriation and how does that impact us? And he termed it cultural misappropriation. And I was like, okay. So some of the terminology, cultural appreciation. So this is cultural appreciation based on his terminology, is sincere participation in Indian culture and Sanatana Dharma with humility, love, adoration, respect, and genuine understanding. And those of us that I feel have taken up the yogic path for one reason or another, we're just scratching the surface. We're seekers of something and we're just not sure what it is. And once we find more and learn more and know more, we continue to grow and we continue to seek more. And I think we are appreciating the culture. We appreciate what's been given to us. We appreciate and genuinely respect and honor the traditions, most of us. Some of us take the knowledge and information and make it their own, or twist it, or shape it to make a ton of money, attract the wrong people, whatever the case might be. And I feel like that's when it becomes misappropriate, the misuse of these sacred teachings. These teachings have been here longer than we can possibly estimate and understand. And they were given to us, a path laid out for us to live by, to work through lifestyles, work through all kinds of trauma, all kinds of joy. They were the guides to life. It was a guidebook to life. And we have taken it, I think, in some circumstances and twisted and tweaked it to be something that it wasn't intended. And for me, that's where I see cultural misappropriation happening. It's mine, it's my birthright. But if I take it and tweak it and twist it just to suit my path, or just to suit and justify why I'm doing what I do, There's something wrong in that, and we're doing a disservice to the teachers before us. So cultural appreciation is that adoration, that love, the respect for the culture. Culturally appropriate yoga is another terminology that's in the ebook, means yoga within a holistic cultural context of a living sampradaya. It means integrity, fidelity, commitment to yoga, living yoga with humility, love, and respect for the culture. It is, again, that lifestyle. It's the path of love and compassion and grace that we all know. When we turn it around, based on, again, these definitions are from the book given by Dr. Ananda and Malini and Padma. Cultural misappropriation of yoga is misuse, misrepresentation, and misunderstanding of yoga that misleads others. And I find that very powerful, because depending on our life and where we are on this beautiful yogic path, what do? We take what we know and we're so eager and anxious to share it with others. We may be slightly misinformed. And I think the best that we can do as teachers, or those that are seekers of this knowledge, and I think Muggs so eloquently put it one day, as long as we are doing everything in our heart to teach what we know, not what we don't know, and do it with coming from a place of love, respect, and with the purest of intentions, I think that we are doing a service and not misappropriating the teachings. Again, my perspective. When we take what we know and tweak it, it just takes it away from it. So unfortunately. So then denial. Denial is another terminology here, that assuming authority to deconstruct and then reconstruct a sterile yoga with new names, meanings, and theories that are devoid of cultural elements. When we think about what has been presented to us, Patanjali's sutras and the multiple commentaries that are out there, everybody that has written a commentary, I don't know what commentaries you ladies are familiar with, but the commentaries that are out there, I've read, some resonate, some do not. Some feel so beautiful and some are very sterile, or there's a black and a white and there's no gray area. The sutras were just that, threads to live by. Those are those lifelong things that we have to live by. So when we tear them apart and reconstruct them to say something that they weren't intended to, I think, and to lose the cultural aspects behind those, it's important to look at where this came from. It's important to look at the culture that stands behind this and understand the two. But also, again, I'll say this a million times over, my perspective is we've also evolved into different human beings in different cultures with different things happening in our world and life, dependent upon where we've come from. And dependent on where we've come from, then one statement can hold true for maybe Becky in Canada than Elena in Mexico. With things can vary in different degrees by the society and the culture that we've been brought up in. But to completely deny the history and where this has come from, and to deny how it's been put together and presented to us, is something that, again, is hard for us to understand and comprehend unless we seek and look and review and research and spend so much time in svadhyaya. That's where we seek our truth.
May I just share a thought, Terry, about that? Is that okay?
Sure, please. That's what this is for.
Yeah, I just want to, my thought in this is what I observe in our like here in Canada and in our, I think I can probably speak for sort of like the West, where we've received the teachings of yoga sort of secondary, is that there's a certain sort of sense of entitlement that I think some of us over here have, which is I can pick and choose what works for me, which is not actually how yoga works. Right. And that's what here I think we've done a lot of is, well, I want this piece of yoga and I want this piece of yoga, but the rest is not important to me or even important for me to educate myself about or to educate, right? Like, I think there's a big difference between doing that and then also like the difference between being yourself while teaching what you know, right? Like there's a difference between picking and choosing what I choose to believe in, what works for me, picking and choosing and sharing only that, versus sharing what I know about yoga, the holistic side of yoga, while being myself. So it might look the same, but there's two different heart intentions in that. Does that resonate or make sense?
Well, and that, I think it does. I really think it does, because we all know where we started with our yoga philosophy and our yoga practice and our yoga, the whole path, our whole path. Certain things resonated with us until those seeds grew deeper. And then we search more, and then we plant a few more seeds by something else. And it's a constant evolution and growth process.
Right.
However,
So it's a different from I want this piece. I want this piece.
and that's where the next point of terminology comes in. Then you take that piece and another piece that suits you and leave the rest behind and misrepresent. And that's the next word. Assuming authority to selectively uplift cultural see, here you go, Becky. Assuming authority to selectively uplift cultural elements, to redefine, reconfigure, reconstitute, repurpose, or rebrand yoga. And some of us still are of the belief that yoga is, I got my mat out today. I am a yogi. I practiced yoga. Um, and that's why when we're done with this, that's my next topic for all of us to discuss, hopefully, is what is yoga? So people get a real understanding. It's not just jumping on your mat for 45 minutes a day, it's life. But anyway, and then the last little bit of terminology here for us is dharma. Righteousness, and as Dr. Ananda always says, right useness, right thought, right speech, right action. And I know that I, early on in my yoga studies, spent so much time thinking Dharma was tangible, something, that it was, I know my life's purpose, but what is my life's purpose? What is it I'm good at? What is it I'm passionate about? What is it that I can do for the rest of my life to fulfill my dharma? When to me, again, is simply my dharma is, as Muggs and Dr. Ananda have taught me, it is doing my very best at whatever it is I'm doing at this very moment. It's not one thing. It's just like yoga is not jumping on your mat. It's all encompassing my entire life. It is, dharma is the same. It is doing the best that I can with what I have and the knowledge that I have and the tools that I have, doing whether it's doing the dishes or cooking a meal or facilitating this discussion. It's living my life with right speech, right thought, right action. That's what my dharma is. And how simple it is and how complicated we've made it. So, with those comments, before we jump into some different things here, does anybody have anything on terminology or questions, or what they thought or didn't think about any of what cultural appropriation or misappropriation is? You guys are free to jump in at any time. All right. So, I want to look at the difference is, Becky, did you
Well, I just wanted to remark how nice the simple shift of the terminology from cultural appropriation to cultural misappropriation is. It really helped me to perceive, because I am a white girl in Canada, right? Like, really legit question, why is it what I'm doing not cultural appropriation? And I've been asked that, and it was really difficult for me to answer that. Notwithstanding that it was an attack, not an actual like sincere question. But Dr. Ananda's simple adding of the misappropriation helped a real good solid click in my head, right? Because it was like, because I understand the word misappropriation way better than I understand the word appropriation, right? So I like it for myself. I don't know if anybody else found that was helpful. I would love to hear.
So that does kind of lead us into the next little tidbit, because what we're going to do is break down based on, oh, Lisa, oh, she's got her thumbs up. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is the next part. And if you haven't gotten the ebook, it's really something I really encourage you to do, because this is where we talk about what is appropriation and what is misappropriation based on these different places and things that we'll venture into. So the first one is positionality. So culturally appropriate, when we take a position, it is that appreciation and respect for integrity, fidelity. We love the culture. We love yoga. We live it. We understand that we need to be humble and do this with humility. We know our place in the lineage. I mean, when I first took my very first 200-hour training, I could finish it and somebody could ask me, about the lineage, and it's like, I don't have a clue. Do we know our lineage? Do we know where these teachings come from? We need to know, because we are sharing our knowledge that comes from somewhere. It's not ours. It was given to us. Maybe not the traditional way, but it was knowledge that was given to us. It's important that we acknowledge that. Where do our teachings come from? This is not something I just whipped up and slept on overnight and here we go. This came from a lineage of people who have passed this on. Not people, but amazing, amazing conduits of the divine that have passed this on to us. So holding and giving accountability to that. One of the things I learned from Muggs, from years of teaching, is always honor. Where did this come from? That's very simple asteya. It's stealing to not acknowledge. So when we talk about positionality, and look at misappropriation, we position oneself as the expert or the authority. So we know, oh, speak of the devil, here comes Muggs.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So positioning ourselves as the expert. I don't think that I I don't think that my teachers, hi Mugs, I don't think that my teachers can honestly say they're the experts. No one can say they're the expert. There's one expert. That's the divine. We are just here learning, and it's constant learning. So taking a position in yoga that all in are the expert, that's culturally misappropriate. Removing all the cultural elements, failing to cite and refer to the tradition or the sources or where you've gained your knowledge or where you've gained the seeds that you were planting. And again, falls right back onto the yamas and the niyamas. That's part of the 8 limbs. It's what we are here to learn and do. So misrepresentation, position, again, the authority by reconstructing. I'll take a little bit of this, like you said earlier, Becky, and I'll take a little bit of that, and I'll take a little bit of this and throw it all together and make it my own.
And then give it a name and trademark it and claim the expert position that you'd created that.
Yeah. And again, that's not practicing asteya. That is not practicing what we're here to practice. So that's positionality. So if we think about how we present ourselves when we are teaching, and present ourselves even if we're not teachers and we're just seekers of the wisdom, and sharing our thoughts, and sharing our position on things. Be true, be honest. We need to share where those things come from. And if we don't quite understand something, be honest about, I don't know, I'll find out. Go back to those that have taught you and ask the questions. So
the other thing that there, Terry, is that we live yoga. That's the other part of positionality that I feel like, are we actually living these practices as best as we can? Because then we're positioned correctly, not necessarily to be the expert, because it's not about being the expert, but it's when you know something, like Dr. Ananda says, you share, right? The sharing is caring. And so it's not like when we are living our yoga as best we can, we're positioned to share it well, right?
yeah. And I feel too, if we only allow it to come from a place of our heart, we are positioned. Our heart if we are not living through that space, that can't be possibly the way we should be teaching or be sharing our wisdom or our knowledge that we've gained. So the next one on the list on this beautiful thought process, does anybody else have anything they'd like to add on positionality before we move on to anything further? No? You make me want to get a warm blanket out, Carrie. She's all bundled up.
They have the air conditioning set to like -20 in this building.
So not good. No, I'm thinking, gosh, she's got to be somewhere really cold. So we'll move on to some things about sacred speech. So we know that, and I know, I watched my first 200 hour, everybody comes out and every shirt says namaste and namaste bitches and go on and so forth. And it just, and again, what's right? Do we even understand what we're saying? Have we taken the time to take a course to actually understand the language and where it comes from? Another thing that I'm very grateful to my teachings and training with monks. Sanskrit was not something that everybody offers, and I feel like they don't because they don't understand it. A lot of curriculum does not include all that in-depth knowledge about Sanskrit. It's not just the language. We were just discussing things in this book group prior to this. Sanskrit is not just a language, it's vibrational energy. It's vibrational healing. So to run around and use the words and to chant and or to do a japa that we don't even understand why we're doing it, how we're doing it, or what the impact it has energetically in this body of ours or our koshas. Where does all that, to go back and trace back to understand before you speak, know the language, know what's happening. That's culturally appropriate. And we should all be, before we speak, know what we're saying and know where that came from, know the history. And Dr. Ananda's topic on this in misappropriation erases the Sanskrit and cultural elements completely. So this is misrepresentation, it's denial. We completely ignore it. We use the words and butcher them and say them in a yoga class or choose not to even say them anymore. We've chosen to go all English, which was a harsh reality for me. I can share this a little bit really quickly about my own personal practice. I got away from learning the words in my first 200 hour, but they were taught to me very, very, very tiny bits of Sanskrit. They were given in Sanskrit, but all the terminology was English. And that's what I was taught to use. And that's what my entire class in front of me when I taught wanted. So I went on my little journey with Muggs to Puerto Rico and mentored under Muggs and went to teach my very first class. And I taught, and Muggs so beautifully said, we need to have a conversation. I had lost my Sanskrit, but in all reality, when I really stepped back to listen to it and understand it, I really hadn't lost it. I really didn't seek to understand it. I didn't seek to understand what was real or where it came from. And now that I know, it's such a beautiful, beautiful language. And so for me to go out, when you talk, Becky, about us going out and teaching as a white girl in the States, I was doing exactly that. I was culturally misappropriate in my teachings because I didn't give honor to where what I was teaching came from. And I didn't respect enough to learn the way it needed to be taught.
It just blows my mind the more that I learn about the importance of language in culture. Like we look at, that was one of the main ways here in Canada that they tried to take the Indian out of the Indian, was to take their language away.
Mhm.
And so the same thing could be seen as happening when we remove Sanskrit out of the practices, is that we're taking a large part of what is the cultural meaning and the symbolism that is inherent in the words, which when we convert them, like Dr. Ananda says, when we say Adho Mukho Svanasana, it's lovely. What a beautiful lyrical word versus down dog. Right? Like there is inherently energy built into the Sanskrit words that once we remove them, we remove that beautiful energy as well. And so as difficult and hard as it is to learn a new language, when we begin to perceive that, okay, so this was an original language, and Muggs, I would love to hear because you've studied so much Sanskrit, where like it was like literally divined. The language was divined from the heavens, and out came the language to describe this process that was unfolding for the human beings, the rishis and the sages, right? So, Muggs, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, a couple things have come up for me on this conversation. On the flip side of what Terry said of not including Sanskrit, is the other side of it, where teachers say Sanskrit so quickly, like they just rattle off all the names, Ekapada Rajaka Podasana, and don't explain what it is. I mean, when we refer back to the science of yoga, when you study science, you learn a new language, right? All the terminology, like anything new that you're learning has its own language to go with it. And so to eliminate that language really doesn't give you the full experience of yoga. So you couldn't really study science without learning the language of science. Or let's just use anatomy, because as yoga teachers, we all have to study anatomy. And there's all this new terminology that we have to understand, like tendons and fascia. And it's a new language that we don't use every day. And if you don't learn it, you really don't have the true picture of anatomy. And so yoga is the same way, except as you say, it is considered a sacred language, and the vibration of the Sanskrit is really important. So don't rush through it, slow it down, do your best to try and pronounce it correctly. And there are those that say it must be pronounced correctly, but don't get hung up on that, because as an English speaking person, I'm never going to pronounce it like Dr. Ananda, but I can do my best. So again, the intention, everything is vibrational. So the intention behind it. So I know that what we want to do is invite people to yoga, make yoga available, and we also don't want to scare them off. So it's a progression, even for some people, to say Om at the beginning of a class. But if we begin to explain what it is we're saying and why we're saying it, we can begin to slowly break down barriers, and so that people lose their fear of the language, because usually those trepidations are fear-based. So if we can slowly, gradually remind people, what I used to do when I would say a chant is, think about in school where we would learn French and we'd learn a song, Frère Jacques, Frère Jacques, you know, and you start learning the language and singing in it. And what are you actually saying? If you give them the translation, they can see how beautiful and loving the translations are behind things. And then it can break down their fears. So the language is huge in yoga, and start slowly and gently to make it acceptable and accessible for people. And I think that they'll comprehend it more, or be able to receive it more. That's all I have to say on that. Yeah.
Muggs, you used the word experience, and I remember having a conversation with Becky when we were first starting the 200 hour, and it definitely is an experience. Like, it's, when I go to my classes, it's when I practice with just the English, it's a totally different experience than when I practice with my teacher who uses Sanskrit. And it's just even your postures and the energy that it creates. It's a beautiful experience.
Mm-hmm. It's cellular, isn't it? Truly is cellular, yeah. Which makes it so exciting for those who are able to receive it. And, you know, I would encourage us to do our best to help people to be able to receive it, because there's enough yoga teachers out there that don't include it, that can get the masses of those people. But what I've always found is, once I just give those little tidbits of explanation and understanding, then people get over their intimidation and begin to just want more. They want to understand more because they didn't know what existed there before. And so by being one of those teachers that gradually makes it okay for people, I think that we can make great strides in terms of representing yoga in the way it was intended.
Carrie just brought out a beautiful point, though. Until you experience it, like you said, it's a game changer. So I think difference in culturally appropriate and misappropriate is when we know and we choose not to use it, or we choose to turn it around and twist it and use it in the wrong context. When I first learned in my first 200 hour, I didn't have those experiences because that's not the background and lineage that I was taught from. So until being with somebody who does use Om, or does use the Sanskrit words that in the way that they're meant to be used, or that I was taught they were this beautiful divine language that contains all this vibrational energy, till you, like you said, Carrie, experience it, how do you know there's anything different? But again, we come back to lack of knowledge, or knowledge and just completely twisting it to make it something that it's not. So
sorry, when you're done.
Nope, I just wanted to say, it's not bashing anybody here who doesn't know. I don't want it to be taken that way. It's just when we have the knowledge, because it's constant work. It is that constant svadhyaya. We have to continually study. And the more we study, the more we learn about ourselves and how we work and how things impact us in different ways. But until we have that, we don't. So Muggs, what did you start to say?
Well, one thing I wanted to say is, did you tell everyone how excited Dr. Ananda was that you're leading this session on cultural misappropriation?
I didn't really, but I just kind of let them know I just told them the little history where it came from. That beautiful Lisa who's with us here asked the question and it snowballed from there. So we have much gratitude for Lisa because of her question, because had that question not been asked, I'm not sure that we'd be sitting here this afternoon.
That's right.
But he is very happy. And again, he wants this. This is not something that he's sitting on tight. Don't tell anybody, it's a secret. He's thrilled that we are sharing this. He's thrilled that I know that I've spoken with Muggs about this, and being a teacher for Muggs and her curriculum, this is going into my trainings because this is very important. This is not just something we train somebody and off you go. This is important that they know the difference, and one person and one baby step at a time, maybe we can change others to understand and offer the same information.
Yeah, and it's incorporated into the professionalism now in the Soya training. So, okay, so the other thing I wanted to say about the Sanskrit, just a little side thing on what Becky said about the downward facing dog. So for one thing, when I want to learn the Sanskrit, I break it down phonetically because it is challenging. Some of those words are so long. And so I would break it down just like svad ya, right? And put hyphens in between each syllable, or Pavana Muktasana. And then I can say it slowly, and then I can explain to people what it means. So just also addressing the downward facing dog. In my original training, that was always called Meru Asana, which was after Mount Meru. And so when you're in the downward facing dog, it looks like a mountain, right? A mountain peak. And that was the classical understanding of what it was called. And it's really relating to our spinal column and how beautifully straight it becomes in the downward facing dog, or in the Meru Asana, because Mount Meru is a sacred mountain in India. And it's like Mount Meru is the path to enlightenment through our spinal column. And so for it to be changed to downward facing dog, it felt like it took the essence of this sacred meaning of Meru Asana and Mount Meru out of the picture to naming it after a dog. And for Dr. Ananda, that was insulting, because Mount Meru is this sacred mountain and this pose was named after it. So sometimes the classical names have a really deep meaning for the people who have been born into this path, and to be cautious about flippantly changing them to something else. So I just thought that was a really interesting comment from him, in how sometimes we have westernized names. And if we're going to do that, be aware what the original name was. And if it has a sacred meaning, don't change it. And so again, that's another thing that with our Soya training is we're always evolving. And so in the manual now, it'll still have downward facing dog or Adho Mukha Svanasana, but it also has brought back the Meru Asana, because that's really important. So people will recognize it by the more Western name, but also as teachers, we can encourage people to bring back in that sacred name of Mount Meru.
I love that you just explained that too, because it also tied in another, we have these little aha moments that are continually going off and on for all of us as we study and learn. But the Brahmadanda, the staff of God, that's our spine. Brahmadanda is our spine. So moving up the spine to enlightenment. That's beautiful. Yeah. So,
I just wanted to share how funny I think it is that there's a big old swear word in the book. Did anybody notice that? In
no.
the image, under the cultural misappropriation, denial and misuse sacred speech, there's a swear word in the image, and I love it. I think it's wonderful. You can see like Dr. Ananda's gangster yogi come out in this moment.
Patty, you had a question you wanted to ask, and Lisa, and can you unmute Patty?
Yes, my question is, I teach children's yoga, and I want to make it fun and exciting for the children, and so we usually we talk about animals and animal poses, and I just wanted to get your thoughts about that. Should I be actually doing Sanskrit words with them? I mean, we do a little bit of that, but it's usually, it has to be move along quickly for them. So I'm just kind of curious as to what you think about that. Talking about animals and, nature and.
I would defer to Muggs in a second, but my question, my answer to that would be, please do, because you have children at a very beautiful age. Children learn things and take in things, and they stay forever. You're planting such beautiful seeds with those children by teaching them, and maybe one word at a time. Teach them Garuda, asana, and that be your focus. And it's known as, the eagle pose to them. You wouldn't have to throw so much Sanskrit every single pose, but even if they learn one at a time, that information sinking in, you're sharing the beauty, you're not changing it. And if you think about it, the more that I have studied this last year with Dr. Ananda, so many of the poses, so many of the asana come from animals, come from their view of nature and the world and the things that they are years and years and years ago exposed to sitting and watching. Yeah. So you still are incorporating the sacredness of those teachings into what's happening, very much so. Muggs, I don't know if you have anything to add to that at all?
Well, what popped into my mind, Patty, was Swami Shivananda Radha's book on the hidden language of yoga. And she also has an exercise book to move through it. But what I love is her sketches, like the sketch of the cobra with eyes. And so she uses the Sanskrit names, but she also has these almost cartoon-like sketches that could really speak to children. So it would be a way of maybe introducing it, and, like the snake Sarpasana versus Cobra Bhujangasana, and maybe just, like I say, don't bombard them too much, but maybe introduce a little bit at a time. And with the images, it could end up being a really fun thing. Like my eagle's name is Garuda, right? and so introduce in that kind of fashion. Or my monkey pose is Hanuman, that's his name, Hanuman, and it might, and Hanuman has a really big compassionate heart, and so introduce some of the mythology behind the characters. And that also reminds me of Sanjay Patel's book, this one, which is also very cartoon-like, but gives the names like Buddha and the pictures, and talks a little bit about it. So let's see. Yeah, so he's got Ganesha there. And so I don't know, some of those little things might really help to bring in some of the asana names. This particular book, though, is more about gods and goddesses and not the poses. But that book, Mythology of Asana, might give you some ideas as well. But you've got lots of ideas in there anyway, and it could be fun.
Lisa, or Patty,
Hi.
did that answer your question or help at all?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa?
Okay, two things. One, Patty. I have done kids yoga for a long time, and I'd like to recommend the book Storytime Yoga by Sydney Solis. So it has all the stories, and then it has a little sequence. It has all of the Sanskrit language, and it introduces everything in a fun way. And if it's created for you, you can just, makes it easier on you versus having to redesign the wheel. But it's Storytime Yoga, Teaching Yoga to Children Through Story by Sydney Solis, Solis. Totally recommend that. And then part two, just in regards to the talk about Sanskrit, I've been taking a course called Indigenous Canada through Coursera. It's free if anybody wants to do it. And one of the lessons, the fellow was discussing the languages of the First Nations people, and how their language, embedded within their language, is the way they observe the world. They call it sacred spirit. So within every single word is actually sacred spirit. And of course, for us to say their word, that would be a really long sentence. So, but they just know what it means innately, and the essence of the word has that embedded in it. Now, I'll just give you an example. So they said, the example that I heard that was taught to me was that the word in the morning, there is an event that they observe, and it's a whole event that happens. And it's a miracle and a blessing, and it shows their connection to the world and the earth and the mother. And translated to English, they call that a sacred event anyways. And it translated to English, it means daytime. And so just looking at the difference between how that just robs the whole essence and the whole observation and sacredness of the word. And that's just referencing their First Nations language, and how vulgar English language can be when you kind of translate it. It just takes away a lot of things. It is efficient, don't get me wrong, and it does make it so everybody understands. But if your point is to relay the spirit underneath the word, then anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Great discussion. Bye-bye.
Lisa. Short, sweet, done, gone. Again, thank you, Lisa, because again, without you, we wouldn't be here.
So good. And I just want to share in regards to the sacred speech with children, if you can, because sometimes you have to be careful, depending on where the parents especially are at in terms of their own belief systems. Like, how do you approach the sacredness of yoga in a way that doesn't drive people away because they're not quite ready for perhaps these in-depth conversations. But you can use the Sanskrit language, and then when you're imbuing the energy, like Muggs was saying, and Lisa is saying, and Patty, I know you already do, right? Like, you're imbuing that sacredness into the movements, like through what you're teaching them to feel while they're doing the snake pose. You're not just bending your back, you're becoming a snake, right? And we do that. Children do that so well. It's the adults that we have to teach them how to do that. Really, like, the kids already know how to be a snake. It's the adults that forget how to embody that energy, right? But what I find is so fascinating is how well children respond to Om, to chanting Om, and also the pranava, the three sounds of Om. Those, as if I were to only introduce like this sort of sacred speech into children's yoga classes, if I can get away with it, those are the ones that come in, because they're just like, what's the word? Visceral, the responses. From children to adults, the experience of yoga is felt when you chant those sacred sounds. Really. So I would encourage that as a way to bring in the sacred speech as well, is to bring in that chanting, which can even the pranava can be done in I suppose the right word might be careful way to approach it, sacredness, right? Like you can teach it in its sacred way, but you don't necessarily have to dive into the philosophy with children. You don't even have to do it with adults, and they still get that wonderful, beautiful experiential vibration. And what I found over and over and over again with both adults and children is if I don't bring in that, I'm asked why I didn't, because they've come to fall in love with it. And so if for whatever reason I pull it out of a class, invariably I'm approached and said, why didn't we do that today? I missed that today. Which I think is really beautiful, like really powerful and telling. Does that make sense? Mugs, do you have thoughts on that? Because I do find that sometimes we have to be careful in how we frame what we're saying to make sure that it's received.
Yeah, I think you've said it perfectly. I mean, you know, all of those things to address who's the parents of the children, how are they going to receive this, how to do it safely. And I love the idea of looking into what Lisa has to share, because that book sounds like a really, it's thought about all those kinds of things as well along the way. But absolutely, I love what you said, that children they're so sensitive that they can probably tap into the feeling of the vibration much quicker than us, you know. And so that's kind of cool. I'd really love to hear, Patty, how that goes as you do begin to introduce them and see how it flies.
Go ahead, Patty.
I think the other thing that happens with misappropriation, I mean, Canada is a very multicultural nation, and one of the things that kind of can happen as well is that we can assume people who may look like they're East Indian, we may assume that they practice yoga, and that is something that's been coming up for me when I'm working with the kids in the schools, is that they all have different experiences, and they actually do not know that. They don't know these practices. You know, on the odd occasion, I might have one child say to me, or repeat a mantra, and I'm all of a sudden like going, wow, how did they know that? But then I asked the parent, like, he just said this. Do you guys practice yoga? You know, like, and trying to be very kind and saying it in a way that is not going to set off any prejudice or any negative thoughts. But and they respond back to me that, no, we don't. And I'm like, where did he hear that mantra? You know, like, I was blown away. But I mean, those are things that I think we also have to look at too in regards to cultural misappropriation, is that we can't make assumptions that other people practice yoga or know this way of life.
I think it comes back, thanks for sharing that, Patty, because we do make assumptions big time. And I think it comes back to us being that beginner's mind, staying with the beginner's mind all the time, because we don't know what we don't know. We can surmise, you know, the three components of the mind, you know, we take something in and we decide we know exactly what's happening with it. And Mug's beautiful question, what is the truth here really? So until we know the truth, to not dilute it with what we assume, and to treat everything with that beginner's mind and that respect and beginner's mind and intention. If we are not there, you know, we have to always stay in that place. If we don't stay in that space, then we are misappropriating what we're teaching and what we're doing. Yeah, it's always taking that step back. Where am I? What am I doing? What's going on? So It is already 2 o'clock, and I have so much that we want to cover and talk about. And again, I did say first 2 weeks we'd cover cultural misappropriation, but I want to continue till we're through. There's a 40-page document that 3 very special people put together for sharing, and I want to honor it, and I want to honor the teachings behind it. So I'm here. We're going to do this again in 2 weeks. We're going to move on to sacred objects, teaching yoga, teaching teachers, studying yoga. We're going to continue this. So as long as it takes to get through this cultural misappropriation, beautiful book that we've been blessed to have in our hands, I'm here. I hope you guys join me. If you have questions or topics that you would like to move on to afterwards, which may not come for another year because these discussions are so beautiful, please let me know. But this is what we need to do. We need to talk about these things. We need to share these things. So thank you so very much for being here, sharing your thoughts, sharing your wisdom, and asking the questions, because if we don't know things, we react. And we don't want to react, we want to respond. So ladies, thank you again. I will see you in 2 weeks. Stay in touch and we'll continue.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
all. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.